Thomas Brown would always remember the day the American Revolution changed his life. It was the summer of 1775, the 25-year-old's first on his own American land. He'd arrived in the colonies a year earlier from the blustery North England port of Whitby, with 74 indentured servants in tow to start a plantation in the Georgia backcountry near Augusta. The newcomers must have marveled at this strange subtropical landscape where giant black oaks stood like 60-foot columns holding up the sky. Within 9 months, however, Brown and his laborers had transformed this forest into farms. He supervised his burgeoning 5,600-acre estate from a fine new great house, his tenants surrounding him in 36 houses of their own. Horses filled Brown's stables, cattle and hogs fattened off his grass and his feed. But another force was also set to transform Thomas Brown's new world. And he saw it coming one August day in the form of 130 armed men walking straight toward his house. Brown knew before coming to America of the troubles that had been tearing up Anglo-American relations for a decade due to a series of taxes imposed by Britain that had triggered a heated conflict over the limits of parliamentary authority and the rights of colonial British subjects. Brown confidently reckoned that Georgia, 1,000 miles away from New England, the center of unrest, had no connection or concern, as he put it, in such affairs. Always blame the New Englanders when trouble comes. Even in 1774, investing his personal fortune, investing his own future in the American colonies looked like a really good bet. But in April 1775, British and American troops exchanged the first shots of the Revolution outside Boston, and no part of the colonies, not even the remote Georgia backcountry, would remain unconcerned for long. In Savannah and Charleston, patriots formed associations to organize support for the rebellion, and they approached Brown and his neighbors to join. Did he have anything to gain from it? Well, not really. He intended to spend the rest of his life in the colonies, and revolution looked like a bad bet for property and for security. So Brown refused the Patriot overtures, and he signed on to a Loyalist counter-association instead. The next thing Brown knew, though, the Patriot invitations had become demands, delivered by gangs like the one at his door. Standing on the porch, the sticky heat clinging to him like a second shirt, Brown tried to put the men off calmly. He had no wish to fight his own neighbors, he said, but he, quote, could never enter into an engagement to take up arms against the country which gave him being, unquote. The conversation quickly turned more heated. Some of the associators, quote, threatened that unless he would subscribe to the association, they would drag him by force to Augusta, unquote. Brown backed into the house to seize his weapons, determined, as he said, to defend himself as long as he was able against any violence. It would be at the peril of that man who should attempt it, he cried, brandishing his pistols. 6 men lunged at him. Blades flashed, a gun fired, a rifle butt swung up over his head and smashed squarely down onto his skull. Then, blackness. What came next, he would reconstruct much later, from flashes of recollection in a semi-conscious haze. Shattered head throbbing, body bleeding, he rattles over a track. They reach Augusta. He's tossed to the ground, his arms lashed around the trunk of a tree. He sees his bare legs splayed out in front of him, funny-looking foreign things, and he sees hot brown pitch poured over them, scalding and clinging to his skin. Under his feet, the men pile up kindling and set it alight. The flame catches the tar sears his flesh. His feet are on fire. 2 of his toes are charred into stubs. The attackers seize his broken head by the hair and pull it out in clumps. Knives take care of the rest, cutting off strips of scalp, making the blood run down over his ears and face and neck. Half scalped, skull fractured, lamed, slashed, and battered, Brown, remarkably, survives. Later, a doctor comes to the place where he's confined and bandages him up, setting his bones on course to heal. A sympathetic guard, moved by the sight of this badly damaged man, agrees to let Brown get away. Brown slips out of custody, rides over the border into South Carolina, and takes shelter with another Loyalist friend. Now, the revolution of Thomas Brown, on the days that he remembered it in August of 1775, is not the revolution that you probably were raised with. It's probably not the revolution that you're familiar with of bright, shining ideals, a revolution more of ideals than of violence of this kind. So what can we learn from looking at the revolution of a figure like Thomas Brown? Well, I think it makes us throw away a lot of preconceptions about the revolution as we know it. And it also makes us begin to throw away some preconceptions about Loyalists, too. Now, bear in mind that at this time, the time that Thomas Brown is having to make this decision on the fly in the backcountry of colonial Georgia, this is a time at which perhaps 1 in 3 colonial Americans, given that choice, would have made the same choice as Thomas Brown. They would have made the choice to remain loyal. They would have figured that their best bet for security, for property, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property would have remained with the British Empire. This is a time at which maybe only 1 in 3 would have taken the other side to say, hey, let's cut the ties. So in fact, at the beginning of the war, we're talking about a plurality or a large group of people who would have sided with Thomas Brown.